The last few weeks here on the channel, we've put together a few really cool systems, and I think for the most part, you guys have enjoyed it. But they've all shared one really big problem, and that's parts availability. Today, we're going to try to fix that. This is a sub $700 build that you can actually buy right now. Last year's award-winning PureBase 500 is back with more style, better airflow, and more features. Meet the latest stellar offering from Be Quiet, the PureBase 500 DX. Dressed in black or white, the DX introduces improved airflow through the complete mesh front panel and an eye-catching addressable RGB accent. It retains the same functional yet compact interior layout with room for up to a 360mm radiator, and it does this all for under $100. To learn more, head over to BeQuiet.com or check the link below. It is a super frustrating time to be a PC builder right now. While you have certain components like memory and storage that are absolutely cratering in price, making it really appealing to start building a parts list around those items, you also have things like cases, power supplies, and motherboards that are in such short supply that even if you can find them at all for sale, usually third-party resellers have just jacked the prices up through the roof. Over the past few weeks, you guys have definitely made it known that you'd prefer to see builds using components that you can actually find on store shelves or virtual store shelves. So that is what we are doing here today. This is going to be a $700 or actually sub $700 1080p gaming PC that you can build right now. Now, we do these kinds of builds here every week on the channel, visiting different price points and performance targets and applications. So if you don't want to miss out on any of that stuff, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below and that like button as well if this video helped you out at all. I definitely did have to make some pretty difficult choices when it came to our components to try to fit into any kind of a reasonable budget. I actually started this build video trying to hit a $600 target and just found that it's not really doable right now with any kind of a reasonable system. I did a $550 build a few months ago on the channel where all the parts were in stock when I filmed that video, and now looking at those components, that system is probably $800. It started with a RYZEN 5 1600AF, which is supposed to be an $85 part and is now $150, $160 if you could find it in stock at all. So there are definitely some problems with trying to part out a system right now, and to be honest, my advice to you would be, if you can wait. Prices of these items and anything else of these generations will start to come down, I think, fairly soon as the supply chain from China starts to catch up after the pandemic and closures and all that have happened and taken care of and everybody's back up and running. Hopefully that's within the next couple of months, but also within that same time frame, we are likely to get new processors from AMD and new graphics cards from NVIDIA. So you never really know what the gaming PC landscape is going to look like in a couple of months and by the end of 2020. But right now, it is pretty bleak. I did my best to put together a $700 system that is fairly reasonable for gaming, and let's just run it down right now. Let's start out talking about the processor, and of course we're going AMD for this build. This is the Ryzen 3 3300X. It came out a few months ago now, and I used it in a different build, actually the world's smallest gaming PC, and if you want to check that video out, you click on that link right up there. But it did prove itself to be a really capable gaming processor. Even though it only has 4 cores and 8 threads, it was still clocking fairly high, up to about 4.3 gigahertz under load, and it games really well. So we're going to use that again here, but just keep in mind that under normal circumstances for this chip's, whatever it is, $130 or so, you should be able to probably do a little bit better on the processor front than 4 cores and 8 threads. Like I said earlier, the Ryzen 5 1600AF should be $85, and that's a 6-core 12-thread part. So right now, again, we're already kind of starting out behind the 8 ball. We're going to be dropping our 3300X into ASUS's B450M Plus Tough motherboard. Now, this is a micro ATX board, so correspondingly, we're going to use a micro ATX case that we're going to talk about in a second. But overall, this is a fairly basic board. It doesn't have a whole lot of extra features, but it's going to do fine for our 3300X. Still has M.2 storage capabilities, and it looks pretty decent. It's mostly black and it's got the IO shroud. So I think we should be okay with this board, especially because we are running a lower end Ryzen processor. Should not have any problems at all with it. On the graphics side, I kind of struggled with the question of RX 5500 versus 5500 XT versus something like a GTX 1650. Ultimately landed on the 5500 XT, was able to fit it in the budget. Obviously, this is going to be a more powerful card than the 5500. The 5500 base card is pretty anemic, even at 1080p. This does do much better. The biggest restriction that this has is the 4 gigs of VRAM, and we'll see what happens with that. For the most part, 1080p gaming should be okay with 4 gigs, but a lot of modern titles are now exceeding that amount, even at medium settings, so we'll see how that goes. But I think the 5500 XT overall is a good 1080p card. And then for memory, I also kind of waffled back and forth if I wanted to go with 2x4 gig kit or 2x8 gig kit. Ultimately, I think 2x8 is the right choice if you can get it into your budget. So we're going with a pretty basic kit of Corsair Vengeance LPX DDR4 3200. This kit now is only like $80 or something like that, and the choice isn't really that difficult at that price point because 16 gigs of memory in a modern system is almost a requirement, and I'm glad that we're able to get it in with the rest of our parts and still stay under budget. For storage, just a very basic Crucial P1 SSD. This is a 500 gig drive, and it's pretty cheap. It was only like $50 or $60, so definitely fits in with the rest of our build. For power, 450 watts should be all you really need. Really, the cheapest one on the market right now is EVGA's 450BR. I think you probably still want to stick with an 80 plus bronze or better rated unit. 80 plus rated or not rated, I would just stay away from at this point. There are enough 80 plus bronze and up rated power supplies. We should be able to get one for a decent price right now. Newegg has this for $50. I don't know why it wasn't coming up on PC Part Picker. I actually had to manually enter the price, but I went on Newegg and found it there. So it was like $49.95. So that even is an inflated price for this power supply. I think normally this is like 30 bucks, but still it's basically the least expensive, reasonable power supply on the market. So that's what we're going with. And then we are jumping up to our case. This is one of the more expensive parts that we're using here. And again, it's something that I did struggle with a little bit. I would not blame you at all if you wanted to cut down on the expense of your case. This is the FRACTAL MESHIFY C Mini. And one of the reasons that I went with it is because I like this case a lot. It has great airflow, great layout. It is perfect for a micro ATX system. There are really no space restrictions in here. Cooler height, GPU length, it all fits. There's plenty of room. And like I said, the airflow is really good. If you wanted to go with something a little more basic, Cooler Master has like their Masterbox Lite 3.1 or something like that. That is also micro ATX. It's about $50 or $60. So good amount less expensive than this, but I think the build experience and the overall performance of your system is going to be much better if you go with the MESHIFY. So that is our $700 build. Yes, it does seem like a little bit less of a gaming system than we would normally get for that budget, but that's where we're at right now in July of 2020. So let's put it together and put it to the test. So here is our $700 PC. And the time-lapse footage that you guys saw of me putting this system together was about 11 total minutes. Granted, yes, I still had to plug in like the front panel headers and stuff like that, but overall, from getting stuff out of boxes, putting it together, and installing it in this case, about 11 minutes of footage. And that kind of speaks to how simple this system is. And simple isn't necessarily bad. We worked with the stock cooler, which I haven't done in a while, and that was just simple clip-in process. The case, the MESHIFY C, one of the reasons that I recommend it is that the build process is so seamless and everything fits so well, especially for a mini ITX build. Use the power supply that was non-modular, so there's no plugging into those cables. Cable management in the back was simple and easy. Overall, it was pretty fun to build a system like this when I'm used to putting together much more complicated builds. But on the flip side of that, we ended up with gaming performance that was, I guess, expected, unfortunately. Even 1080p titles, if you're talking about AAA games, are going to be a little bit of a challenge for this build. The 5500 XT is a good 1080p card, but this particular model, the Sapphire Pulse, only has 4 gigs of VRAM. We were running into frame time issues in Shadow of the Tomb Raider with a lot of stuttering. And when I was running the benchmark, I was watching the footage and I was like, I can't imagine myself playing this game with it performing this way. Similarly, even our other titles were way down in frame rate versus what we normally see on a 1080p machine. Doom Eternal was running fine. It was up in the 90s, but I had to crank the fidelity down because 4 gigs of VRAM is just not enough. The game would not even load with Nightmare, Ultra Nightmare, or even just Ultra settings. So I had to keep going down until I found a setting that would actually allow the game to run. And unfortunately, that's one of the restrictions that you have when you use a lower end GPU. I think from here on out, it's going to be hard for me to recommend a graphics card with only 4 gigs of memory, which, looking back over the past few years, that's a pretty strange statement for me to make. 4 gigs has been good for such a long time. But I guess we are moving on from that now. And if you are going to be playing games in 1080p, I mean, I guess you could get away with it. But I think if you are building a new system, you should probably be looking at 6 gigs or more realistically, even probably 8 gigs of memory as your baseline. We could also look at system memory here. And this build altogether was $694. That's with the 2x8 gig kit of memory and this more expensive case. Again, I think the case is worth it, but if you wanted to step that down and maybe you wanted to step the memory down, I also parted out a system that was sub $600. That would likely perform pretty much the same, although the build experience probably wouldn't be as good, and you would run into some issues with system memory at some point, probably. I think 16 gigs is the baseline for now, but given that this motherboard has 4 DIMM slots, if you wanted to start out with a 2x4 gig kit and then upgrade to another 2x4 gig kit at a later time, I suppose that's reasonable. But if your budget is such that that is the restriction that you have, I think, again, waiting is probably the better option. Or to be honest, as much as it pains me to say, maybe look at consoles. The next generation of consoles that are coming out are going to have more powerful hardware, they're going to have more optimized games, and you'll probably get a better gaming experience than you will on something like this. Granted, you won't be able to tinker with it or tune it or overclock it or have the upgrade path, but if all you're looking for is to plunk down some money and play some games, then that might be the better option. This timeline is very weird as far as PCs go. A couple years ago, we had the big problem with cryptocurrency mining and the lack of availability of GPUs. Well, now GPUs are at least available, and we have problems with supply for other components, even though we have lower prices on memory and storage. So it kind of ebbs and flows, and as much as I want to be able to recommend building a PC right now, especially a budget PC, which is what a lot of people seem to want, it's hard for me to make that recommendation. And if you are going to build something and you need it immediately, this is an option. All the parts are linked down below if you want to take a look, but if you could hold off even a little bit, that's probably the better choice. So that's it for this week's video, guys. I hope that you took something away from it. It was certainly an interesting experience and an interesting exercise for me to do. Leave me some comments down below what you guys think of this $700 build and the state of the PC building market right now. And I will see you next week for another build, as always. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Later.